The air shimmered with heat, and the distant crackle of flames echoed through the canyon like a warning scream. The forest was alive and hungry. Leona Hart's boots skidded over loose stones as she scrambled along the narrow ridge, Maeve snug against her chest in a worn leather sling. Her daughter's small face, pale and serene in sleep, pressed into her shoulder. She could hardly breathe. Smoke clawed at her lungs and stung her eyes. The fire had come without warning, racing down the northern slope like a living beast, feeding on the dry pine and scrub. Her cabin, her home, was somewhere behind her, possibly already swallowed by the inferno. Panic gnawed at her, but the motherly instinct to survive and protect her child drove her forward. Each step was treacherous, loose rocks threatening to give way beneath her weight, each gust of wind carrying burning embers that danced like malevolent fireflies. A shadow moved against the orange haze. Leona froze. Atop a distant ridge, a figure sat astride a horse, silhouetted against the glowing sky. The horse pawed the ground, uneasy. The rider raised a hand, and Leona's pulse jolted. "Over here!" she shouted, her voice hoarse, rasping through the smoke. "Please." The figure spurred his horse down the slope, muscles rippling beneath a worn leather vest. The closer he came, the more imposing he seemed, tall, broad-shouldered, a living force of the wilderness itself. Long black hair whipped across his face in the wind, streaked with smoke, and a wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over dark, piercing eyes. "I wouldn't be out here if I didn't have to," he called, dismounting with ease despite the treacherous terrain. His gaze shifted to the baby in her sling, then to Leona's smoke-streaked face. "You've got a baby. This fire doesn't play fair." Leona's knees threatened to buckle. Relief washed over her, mingled with disbelief. I didn't think anyone else was near. It came so fast, my cabin." His eyes flicked toward the inferno, calculating. "No time to worry about property. Follow me. I know a way out." Her heart hammered. Trusting a stranger was almost impossible, but staying here wasn't an option. She swung onto his horse behind him, gripping his waist as he kicked the animal into a gallop. Maeve whimpered, small fingers curling into her mother's shirt, and the sound made Leona's chest tighten. The forest was a hellscape. Flames leapt from tree to tree, sparks raining like miniature meteors. The smoke thickened, choking them, and the wind howled through the canyon like a living beast. Yet Marcus, because she caught his name when he spoke, moved with an uncanny calm, issuing low commands to the horse that guided them around flaming trunks and fallen timber. Every movement was deliberate, precise, born of experience and a survival instinct honed through years of danger. Leona clung to him, coughing, tears stinging her eyes. Who are you?" she managed, voice trembling. "Marcus Kane," he said without looking back. "I own a few ranches in this region. You?" "Leona Hart," she gasped, adjusting Maeve in the sling. He gave a grim, almost imperceptible nod. "Lucky, Miss Hart. Not everyone makes it through a fire like this." The horse leaped over a fallen log, landing with a thud that shook the ground beneath them. Sparks flew around them, catching in Marcus's hair, glinting in the fading sun. Leona gripped his vest, stomach churning with a mixture of fear and awe. He wasn't just a man, he was a force of nature, untamed and relentless. Then came the scream. A human scream, sharp and raw, cutting through the roar of the fire. Leona's blood ran cold. "That came from the cabin," she said, pointing blindly toward the blackened silhouette of her home. Marcus's jaw clenched. "We're going back," he said. His voice was steady, commanding. "Hold on tight." The ride back was worse than the first. Flames flanked them on both sides, the wind carrying them unpredictably. Leona's lungs burned with every breath. Maeve fussed, tiny hands grasping for comfort. Marcus rode like the fire had chosen him as its opponent, weaving and ducking, never losing focus. Sparks seared their faces, but Marcus ignored the pain. He was all instinct, all focus, all survival. When they finally reached a clearing near her cabin, the sight made Leona's stomach twist. The forest around her home was engulfed, a living hell of orange and black. Smoke spiraled into the sky, carrying the scent of burning pine and charred earth. Her cabin was partially obscured by flames, the roof sagging, the walls trembling in the heat. "Stay back," Marcus commanded, dismounting first and pulling her gently to the ground. "We're assessing. Don't panic." Her legs shook as she took in the scene. Her home, her daughter's crib, all the belongings she'd painstakingly gathered as a single mother gone if the fire continued its ruthless march. And yet, despite the chaos, Marcus's eyes were calm. He was not intimidated, not even a little. He moved with authority, checking the wind, noting the fire's path, calculating every possible escape route. Leona couldn't stop watching him. There was a magnetism to him, a rare mix of danger and protection, strength and assurance. Can we save anything?" she asked, voice trembling. "We save people first," Marcus said firmly. "Stuff can be replaced. Lives cannot." Leona nodded, swallowing her panic. She hugged Maeve tighter, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her own. The fire's roar seemed almost alive, a creature of smoke and flame, but Marcus didn't flinch. Suddenly, movement in the distance caught her eye, a flicker of color against the orange sky. Another person, trapped by the blaze. A neighbor, perhaps, or a lost traveler. Her heart clenched. Marcus followed her gaze. "Stay here with the baby," he said, determination flashing in his eyes. "I'll handle this." Before she could protest, he sprinted toward the figure, moving with supernatural speed across burning terrain. Leona's breath caught in terror and awe. She gripped Maeve, heart hammering, as the smoke swirled around them, carrying the acrid scent of pine and ash. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, Marcus returned, guiding a terrified teenager, soot-blackened and trembling, to the clearing. The boy stumbled into Leona's arms, and she held him as he gasped, eyes wide with shock and fear. "You're safe now," she whispered, tears streaking her smoke-stained cheeks. Marcus's gaze swept the burning forest. "We need to move further," he said. "There's a ridge not far from here. It's high, and the fire won't reach us for a while." Together, they climbed, the heat pressing against them like a living weight. Sparks hissed as they landed in the clearing atop the ridge, the forest far below reduced to a writhing sea of fire. Leona sank to her knees, Maeve safe in her arms, finally allowing herself to breathe. "Thank you," she whispered, looking at Marcus. Relief, gratitude, and a strange flutter she hadn't felt in years mixed inside her. He nodded, brushing soot from his face. "You're welcome. But don't get used to being saved. You've got grit, Miss Hart. That matters more than you know." Leona stared at him, seeing not just the rugged cowboy who had risked everything, but a man who seemed to understand her fears, her burdens, her fight for survival. In that moment, as the fire raged below them and the smoke spiraled into the sky, Leona realized that her life had changed forever. She had no idea yet how deeply or in what ways, but for the first time in years, hope flickered, fragile yet stubborn, against the darkness. And somewhere deep in the heart of the inferno, Leona knew that this encounter was just the beginning not just of survival, but of secrets, danger, and a life that would never be the same again. The night fell like a heavy curtain over the ridge, the flames of the forest fire now a distant roar below them. Smoke still lingered in the air, curling around burned pines and blackened earth, but the wind carried it away slowly, leaving a faint, acrid scent. Leona sat on a flat rock, Maeve nestled against her chest, eyelids drooping with exhaustion. Marcus Kane crouched nearby, tending a small fire with practiced hands, sparks dancing into the air. Leona couldn't stop replaying the events of the day in her mind. The fire had come so fast, so mercilessly, and yet they had survived. And Marcus, he had saved them, not once but twice. There was a calm authority about him that made her feel both safe and strangely unsettled. "I still can't believe you went back toward the fire," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "With Maeve in my arms, I thought—" "I know what you thought," Marcus interrupted gently, not looking up from the fire. "I've been in situations worse than that. People get hurt, homes get lost, but children come first, always." Leona nodded, biting back the lump in her throat. "I don't even know how to thank you. If it weren't for you—" She trailed off, staring at Maeve's peaceful face. Marcus finally looked at her, eyes dark and steady. "You don't need to thank me. Just survive. That's enough." A silence fell between them, the kind that is heavy but not uncomfortable. The fire below had left scars on the forest, but it had also uncovered something. During the chaos, Leona had noticed a small pile of papers near her cabin, partially charred but still intact. She had tucked them carefully into her coat pocket, intending to look at them once they were safe. Curiosity gnawed at her. Now, under the dim glow of the ridge firelight, she pulled them out. Her hands shook slightly as she spread the papers on a flat stone. They were old deeds, official-looking, stamped and signed, but they weren't ordinary. These are my family's land deeds," she murmured, scanning the papers. "Some of these plots were sold decades ago, but someone's altered them. Forged dates, wrong names. Someone tried to erase parts of our claim." Marcus crouched beside her, peering at the documents. His expression tightened. "You're telling me someone's tampering with your family land and they set a fire to cover it up?" Leona swallowed hard. "It's possible. I didn't see who did it, but it had to be deliberate. Fires don't usually start like that so fast, so precisely." Marcus nodded, running a hand through his long black hair, still streaked with ash. "This isn't just a fire. Someone wanted to take what belonged to you and possibly to me too." Leona frowned, her mind spinning. "Why would they care about your land?" "Because it's more than land," Marcus said. His voice dropped, low and intense. "Owning property in this state isn't just about wealth. It's about influence, control, and someone out there wants it badly enough to kill for it." A shiver ran down Leona's spine. Suddenly, the danger they'd survived felt closer, more personal. This wasn't random. It was calculated. They didn't speak for a while, each lost in thought. Marcus broke the silence first. "We need to secure what we can, protect what's left, and figure out who's behind this before they strike again." Leona nodded. Despite exhaustion, a spark of determination lit inside her. She had survived fires, raised Maeve alone, and fought for every inch of her life. She wouldn't let some greedy landowner or worse destroy everything she'd built. The following morning, the air was crisp and clear. The fire had mostly burned out, leaving a landscape of charred trunks and scorched earth. Marcus led Leona and Maeve back toward her cabin, keeping to higher ridges where the fire hadn't reached. Each step was cautious. Fallen debris and weakened ground made every movement dangerous. When they arrived, the scene was devastating. The cabin was partially destroyed, the roof sagging in places, the walls blackened by smoke. Leona's heart twisted, but she forced herself to focus. Marcus dismounted first, moving around the cabin to assess damage. His eyes were sharp, scanning for anything suspicious. "It's bad," he admitted, tone grim. "But not everything is lost. We can rebuild." Leona swallowed her grief, nodding. "And the deeds? We need to protect them. Someone tried to take them. Marcus reached into his coat and produced a small leather pouch. Keep them close. We'll find out who's behind this and make sure they regret it. Leona glanced at him, a mix of gratitude and something else she couldn't quite name in her chest. Why? Why do you care so much? You've never even met me until yesterday. Marcus met her gaze, eyes steady. Because someone has to care. And because letting injustice slide isn't who I am. They worked quietly for hours, salvaging what they could from the cabin and clearing debris. Maeve played nearby under Leona's watchful eye, a small bundle of innocence amid the destruction. As the sun dipped low in the sky, Leona finally allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Sitting on a charred log, Maeve in her arms, she looked at Marcus. You know, I've survived a lot of things on my own. But today, I don't know if I could have done it without you. Marcus's jaw tightened, and he shrugged, as if dismissing her words, but his eyes softened. We all need a hand sometimes, Miss Hart. Don't ever think you're weak for needing help. Leona studied him. There was something in Marcus, something untouchable yet profoundly human. He carried the weight of his own past, battles she could only guess at, yet he made space for her and Maeve. In a world where fire and greed threatened to consume everything, he was a steady anchor. Night fell again, and they camped near the ridge. The wind had cooled, carrying away most of the smoke, leaving only the faint scent of charred pine. Marcus built a small fire, careful to keep it controlled. Leona fed Maeve, who had finally fallen asleep again, and then joined Marcus near the flames. You ever think about leaving all this behind? She asked, nodding toward the forest, the scorched land, the endless threats of the West. Marcus shook his head slowly. No, this is who I am. My land, my people, my responsibility. And now, yours too. Not that you asked for it, but you're part of this now. Leona felt a jolt of something gratitude, yes, but also something warmer, something unexpected. She had been surviving alone for years, and yet here was a man who made her feel seen, safe. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. Hours passed in companionable silence. Marcus tended the fire, Leona watched Maeve sleep, and somewhere deep in the darkness of the forest, shadows shifted. Unknown dangers were still out there, but for now, there was safety. And in that fragile safety, Leona realized the fire had revealed more than just destruction. It had revealed a path forward. She didn't yet know how deep the conspiracy went or who had started the fire, but she knew one thing with certainty: she wasn't alone. And with Marcus by her side, perhaps they could survive the storm, uncover the truth, and reclaim what had been threatened. As the stars blinked cold and distant above them, Leona whispered to the night, almost to herself, "We'll find them. Whoever did this. They'll pay." Marcus, sitting a few feet away, caught the edge of her vow. His expression was unreadable, but there was a spark in his dark eyes, a promise of protection, and perhaps something more. And as Maeve slept peacefully, oblivious to the dangers of the world, Leona Hart felt something she hadn't felt in years, the first true glimmer of hope in a life that had been defined by survival. The fire had burned. It had destroyed. But it had also revealed secrets that would change everything. The sun rose hot and harsh over the burned forest, casting long shadows across the blackened earth. Leona Hart tightened her coat around Maeve, who squirmed in her arms, curious at the world beyond the ridge where they had spent the night. The forest smelled faintly of ash, and the charred pines stood like skeletons, reminders of how quickly everything could be lost. Marcus Kane was already on his feet, moving with quiet authority along the ridge. His eyes scanned the horizon, alert for any movement. Despite the destruction from the fire, he seemed calm, almost untouchable. Leona couldn't help but admire the way he assessed danger, like the land itself spoke to him. whispering secrets only he could understand. "We need to check the cabin again," he said, his voice low but firm. "Make sure nothing else is missing and we see what's salvageable." Leona nodded. The fire had spared little. Her home had been her anchor for years, a small refuge from the hardships of raising Maeve alone. Now, as they approached the cabin along a winding trail, the reality of the destruction hit her all over again. But then Marcus stopped abruptly, crouching behind a fallen tree. His hand rose, palm open, signaling her to stay quiet. Leona's stomach tightened as she followed his gaze. On the horizon, a cloud of dust rose horsemen, fast and deliberate. Men, at least a dozen, riding with a purpose that chilled her blood. Guns glinted in the morning sun, hats pulled low, faces unreadable. Marcus's jaw clenched. Outlaws? Or worse. His voice carried the weight of someone who knew exactly what that meant. Leona swallowed hard. "Do you think they're after the land?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scanned each rider, reading their movements like lines in a book. "Partly, but this is personal. They know who I am, and now they know about you too." Her heart pounded. She had expected challenges, threats maybe, but not a small army of armed men riding toward them with intent to harm. "Stay behind me," Marcus said, shifting Maeve securely in her arms. "Do exactly what I tell you. Don't panic." The riders drew closer, and the tension in the air was palpable. Dust swirled around them, making the morning sun a harsh orange glare. Leona's fingers curled into Marcus's coat, knuckles white. She had never felt so exposed, so fragile, yet oddly protected by the sheer presence of Marcus Kane. The leader of the group dismounted, swaggering toward them. His boots kicked up dust with each step. "Well, well," he said, voice loud enough to carry over the wind. "If it isn't Marcus Kane himself. And what do we have here? A lady and her little girl. How? Quaint." Marcus didn't flinch. "Looking for trouble or just out for a stroll?" he asked, tone flat but deadly calm. The man laughed, a hollow, cruel sound that made Leona's skin prickle. "You own half the state, Kane, but today the cards are changing. Today we take what's ours." Leona felt a shiver run down her spine. The threat wasn't abstract, it was real, immediate. These men weren't mere bandits. They were organized, calculated, and ruthless. Marcus's hand hovered near his gun, but he didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, he assessed, planned, and waited for the perfect moment. His calm was unnerving but effective. Then the first shot rang out, cutting through the morning air like a whip. Marcus dove to one side, pulling Leona down behind a burned tree. Maeve cried out, startled, and Leona pressed her closer, whispering reassurances she didn't fully believe. The battle was sudden and chaotic. Bullets whistled through the air, kicking up dust and sparks. Marcus moved with precision and power, long black hair whipping behind him, muscles taut and coiled. He seemed to anticipate every move of the attackers, countering each advance with skill that bordered on legendary. Leona's fear was sharp, but she forced herself to stay focused. She kept Maeve safe, ducked behind cover, and observed. She saw the greed and arrogance in the attackers' faces, the way they underestimated her and Marcus. And she realized something important. Fear alone couldn't save her or her child action. Courage and quick thinking would. Marcus fired strategically, not wasting a single bullet, disabling attackers without unnecessary risk. When one of the men tried to flank them from the right, he was met by Marcus's rifle, the shot precise and controlled. The rest began to hesitate, confusion spreading as Marcus's skill became undeniable. In the midst of the chaos, Leona's eyes fell on one of the men rifling through the debris near her cabin. Her chest tightened. That was where her deeds, her family's legacy, had been. Without thinking, she grabbed a fallen board and swung at the man, startling him. He stumbled, and she snatched the pouch containing the deeds from the dirt, clutching it tightly to her chest. Marcus noticed and gave her a small nod of approval before turning back to the fight. "Good," he said under his breath. "Keep them safe. That's more important than anything else." By the time the sun reached its peak, most of the attackers had fled, humiliated, or injured. The dust hung thick in the air, making it hard to see, but the immediate danger had passed. Marcus stood over the defeated men, chest heaving, but eyes sharp and alert. Leona set Maeve down carefully, knees shaking. She ran to Marcus, clutching the deeds. "They almost got them," she said, voice trembling. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "They almost got everything. That fire wasn't an accident, and this attack. It wasn't random. Someone wants to take your land and mine. Whoever it is, they're willing to burn, shoot, and lie to get it." Leona felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. "Why? Why us?" "Because we're obstacles," Marcus said quietly. "And obstacles make people desperate." Leona took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. For years she had survived hardship alone, but this was a new kind of danger. And yet, in the face of it, she felt a strange clarity. She wasn't going to run anymore. She wasn't going to cower. She had to fight for Maeve, for her family, for herself. Marcus crouched beside her, his tone softer now. "You're stronger than you think. You've survived alone this long, and now you've survived a fire and an attack. You can handle more than you realize." Leona looked at him, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, trust and maybe even admiration. There was no one she would rather have by her side in the chaos of the West than Marcus Kane. Together, they returned to the cabin, surveying the damage. The walls were blackened, the roof partially collapsed, but they had salvaged the deeds and some personal belongings. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rebuild, to start reclaiming what had been threatened. That evening, Marcus and Leona sat near the remnants of the fire, Maeve asleep between them. The forest was quiet now, the wind carrying away the last traces of smoke. Marcus finally spoke about the attackers. "They weren't just opportunists," he said, tone grave. "Someone high up, someone with influence, orchestrated this. I'll find out who it is. And when I do, they'll wish they'd never set foot on our land." Leona nodded, a mixture of fear and determination in her eyes. "We'll need a plan," she said. "We can't just wait for them to strike again." Marcus studied her, a small, approving smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I like the way you think, Miss Hart. You're not just surviving, you're fighting back. And that makes all the difference." For the first time in days, Leona allowed herself to feel a sense of control. The fire had taken much from her, but it had also revealed something vital. She had allies, she had strength. And she had Marcus Kane, a man who was as relentless in justice as the flames had been in destruction. As night fell and stars blinked cold against the blackened sky, Leona held Maeve close, whispering promises she intended to keep. They would rebuild. They would reclaim what was theirs, and they would uncover the truth behind the betrayal. The West was harsh and unforgiving, but for the first time, Leona Hart felt ready to face it, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a fighter, and a mother who would protect her child at all costs. And somewhere deep in the shadows, unknown forces were stirring, unaware that the woman they had underestimated was already preparing to take a stand. The battle for land, justice, and survival had only just begun. The dawn was pale and quiet over the ridge, a fragile calm after the chaos of fire and betrayal. Leona Hart stood with Marcus Kane at her side, Maeve asleep in her arms, and the blackened forest stretching around them. For days they had pieced together clues, traced forged deeds, and identified the men who had tried to burn her home and steal their land. Now the final confrontation awaited. Marcus surveyed the horizon, his long black hair catching the first light. "They're close," he said, voice low but steady. "I've tracked their movements. They're gathering outside the valley, planning their next move. If we wait, they'll strike harder." Leona's jaw tightened. "Then we strike first." Her voice, usually soft, held steel now. The fire had changed her, revealed a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. Marcus noticed it too, a quiet admiration flashing in his dark eyes. Together, they rode down into the valley, Leona holding Maeve securely. The air was thick with dust and anticipation, the sun barely cresting the distant hills. As they approached the ranch-style homestead at the edge of the valley, figures emerged. Men on horseback, guns at their sides, faces twisted with greed and arrogance. They were the conspirators, the ones responsible for the fire, the forged deeds, and the attacks. Marcus dismounted, moving with a calm authority that belied the tension in the air. Leona followed, Maeve safely bundled against her chest. She felt fear, yes, but it was tempered with determination. She would not let these men destroy everything she had fought for. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "Well, well," he said, voice dripping with malice. "Looks like the lady herself has shown up. And Kane, I should have known you'd be somewhere in this mess." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You know why we're here. Stand down or face the consequences." The man laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. "Consequences? You've got no idea what we can do." Leona's hands tightened on Maeve. She stepped slightly forward. "You've underestimated us," she said, voice clear and unwavering. "You thought you could burn, steal, and intimidate. But you miscalculated." The tension was electric, like the charged air before a storm. Marcus signaled subtly to Leona, nodding toward the higher ground at the side of the valley. "Position yourself there. Keep Maeve safe. I'll draw their attention." Leona followed, heart hammering, setting Maeve down behind a low stone wall. She watched Marcus step into the open, sun glinting off his rugged features, muscles coiled and ready, long black hair framing his determined face. He was a force of nature, dangerous, deliberate, and fearless. Then the first shot rang out, echoing across the valley. Marcus ducked behind a boulder, returning fire with precision. The conspirators advanced, confident, but Marcus anticipated each move, countering their attacks with skill honed through years of survival. Leona's heart raced, but she forced herself to focus. She gathered whatever courage she had, helping defend Maeve while watching for opportunities. Her eyes fell on one of the men trying to reach the deeds that Marcus had recovered days ago. Without thinking, she grabbed a fallen branch and swung at him, knocking him off balance just long enough for Marcus to deal with the threat. Hours seemed to compress into minutes as the battle raged. Dust, sweat, and gunpowder filled the air. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows that danced across the valley. Marcus moved like a whirlwind, long black hair whipping behind him, shirtless torso glistening with sweat and strength. He fought with calculated force, protecting Leona and Maeve, but also making it clear that the conspirators' greed and brutality would not prevail. The leader, scarred and desperate, realized the tide was turning. "Fall back," he shouted, trying to rally his men. But it was too late. Their strategy had underestimated Marcus Kane, and they had misjudged Leona Hart. Leona stepped out from behind her cover, her voice carrying across the valley. "You've lost. Surrender now or face justice." Her words, calm but filled with authority, seemed to pierce through the chaos. She had transformed from a frightened mother into a woman of strength and resolve, and the conspirators sensed it. Several of the men hesitated, fear flickering in their eyes as Marcus advanced, his rifle steady, movements precise. One by one, they dropped their weapons, realizing that the fire, the forged deeds, and the West itself had not broken them, they had strengthened them. Finally, the scarred leader was left alone. Facing Marcus and Leona, he sneered, but the defiance in his eyes wavered under their unrelenting gaze. Marcus lowered his rifle, not out of mercy but authority. "The law will handle you," he said. "Anything else, and you'll regret it." Leona approached, Maeve in her arms, and held up the recovered deeds. "These are mine," she said, voice strong and unwavering. "You can't take what's rightfully ours." The leader's face paled. He knew he had been bested, not just by fire and force, but by determination and courage he had not anticipated. With a final glare, he turned and walked away, leaving the rest of his men to face justice. Silence fell over the valley, broken only by the wind rustling through the blackened trees. Marcus exhaled, tension leaving his body for the first time in hours. He moved to Leona and Maeve, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said softly. Leona looked at him, heart swelling with relief and something deeper gratitude, admiration, and a budding trust she hadn't expected to feel. "It is," she whispered. Maeve stirred in her arms, small fingers curling around her mother's, and Leona felt a profound sense of protection and hope. They returned to her cabin, surveying the damage now that the danger had passed. The walls were charred, the roof partially collapsed, but the land was theirs. The fire had destroyed much, but it had also revealed the truth, cleared away the deception, and proven their resilience. Over the next days, Marcus helped Leona rebuild what had been lost. Together, they repaired walls, cleared debris, and reinforced the cabin. Each day, Leona felt her strength returning, fueled not just by survival instinct, but by the support of a man who had risked everything for them. Maeve laughed for the first time in days as she played near the new porch, and Leona felt a warmth she hadn't felt in years. She had survived alone for so long, but now, with Marcus by her side, she realized that life could be more than survival. It could be hope, trust, and even love. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Leona stood with Marcus on the ridge overlooking the land. Maeve slept safely in the cabin, and the air smelled faintly of pine and earth, healing from the fire. "You saved us," Leona said softly, her voice carrying in the warm evening breeze. Marcus looked at her, eyes dark and steady. "We saved each other," he replied. "You're stronger than you know, Leona. Don't ever forget that." She smiled, feeling the weight of the past weeks lift slightly. "I won't, and thank you for everything." He stepped closer, brushing a lock of hair from her face, long fingers lingering on her cheek. "No need to thank me. Just promise me one thing." "What?" she asked, heart fluttering. "Promise me you'll never face the West alone again," he said, voice soft but insistent. "You've survived fires, betrayal, and greed. You don't have to do it by yourself anymore." Leona looked at him, at the rugged, tireless man who had risked his life for her and Maeve, and felt a warmth she hadn't expected. "I promise," she said. The stars began to glitter in the sky, and the first cool breeze of evening whispered through the valley. For the first time in weeks, the West seemed less harsh, less threatening. The fire had destroyed, yes, but it had also revealed courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond forming between them. As the night deepened, Marcus, Leona, and Maeve sat on the porch of the rebuilt cabin, looking out over the land that had been threatened but not conquered. The past weeks had tested them, shaped them, and revealed truths they could not ignore. And in that quiet, starlit moment, Leona realized something profound. Survival had given way to justice, hope, and a chance for a future where she and Maeve were safe and where perhaps, alongside Marcus Kane, she could finally find the life she had longed for. The West was wild and unforgiving, but together they were stronger than any fire, any greed, any betrayal. And from the ashes, they had built not just a home, but a life worth defending, a life full of courage, love, and the promise of tomorrow.